One of the things that I want to do, actually essentially three things. I want to talk to you a bit about our association. How many of you have ever heard of AAC&U? Some of you were in Boston, I know, but it's a higher ed association. It's one of those alphabet soup places in Washington, D.C. We are focused on undergraduate education primarily. We have 1,300 colleges and universities that belong to us. Half of them are public, half are private. 2-year, 4-year research ones, comprehensives, community colleges, faith-based institutions, military academies. And even though we're the Association of American Colleges and Universities, we have international affiliates who belong to our association. Unlike most of the higher ed associations in Washington, D.C., we do not lobby Congress. We gave that up many, many years ago to really focus on best practices in undergraduate education and trying to lift up and to share the kinds of things that work in trying to provide students with a liberal education that are most effective in terms of their deeper learning and that work for all students, not just a limited few who are most accomplished when they come to us. And so that's sort of what we do. So I'm going to talk a bit about that national picture that we get from being in Washington, D.C. I want to talk a little bit about an assessment approach that we have been involved in advancing at AAC&U. And then at the end, talk about and point to some institutions that are engaged in trying to assess student learning in some rather engaging ways that we think show promise for the future. We hear a lot about higher education. We hear a lot about what higher education is not doing. It's broad agreement that our students are not achieving at the levels that we would like them to achieve. But you've all heard about the completion agenda. We know how to do that. Move them through on the assembly line, but it says nothing about what it is that's happening to them, okay? You've heard about badges. These are the things that we're saying are the solution to our problems facing us. Lots of different badges for lots of different things. Trivial pursuit comes along. Breaking things into little pieces that are easily consumable and available with little cost and little effort. Is that really what it is that our students need? The thing that we hear underlying all of this is that we need students to be more competent at different things and be able to demonstrate higher levels of achievement. I'm not so sure that the things that go along with that have necessarily addressed it. We need students who can do things that are not snackable or trivial. This is one of my favorite quotes about how we have typically approached education, in particular, I think, higher education in this country. We focused a whole lot on what students need to know and very little on how they engage in that learning and learn those things and why they are doing that. And our argument is that we need to flip those things around. Why do students need to know certain kinds of things? How are they best able to learn those things in ways that they retain and can use and can keep with them? And then the what will actually come from that. And we're getting a body of evidence now that suggests that that approach actually works and works well for students. Tony Carnevale is a person who's been in the news recently. He's at Georgetown. He used to be with the Bureau of Labor Statistics and worked with higher educational statistics. And he's finding some really interesting things in terms of education experience of students and their earning power. I'm leading with this, even though most of my colleagues on campuses say we're not here to kowtow to what employers want us to do. We're not here to respond to the job market per se, okay? And we're not saying that either. But what we are saying is that employers are actually saying to us the same things that faculty have been saying for decades. We just completed, or we didn't, we had the Hart Research Associates complete a survey for us this past January. So these are recent data, very recent data, as to what employers are indeed looking for in terms of this need to have better prepared students and their dissatisfaction with it. And essentially the takeaway from it is that it takes more than a major to prepare students the way that they need to be prepared to be successful in today's economy. These are some of the big takeaways. I'm not going to read each of these slides, but you can see the kinds of things that they're looking for. Innovation, capacities that cut across, liberal education. AAC&U has an initiative now called LEAP, Liberal Education and America's Promise. We are unabashedly clear about using liberal education. It is grounded in liberal arts education, but it goes beyond that. And so we're not talking about politically liberal, we're talking about the need for students to liberate their thinking, to be able to expand, to cross boundaries, to transfer things, to be open to the new things that are emerging. They like the application of skills. Knowledge for knowledge's sake is a classic in higher education, and I believe in that. But if you're going to be successful in the contemporary world, you also need to be able to know what to do with that knowledge, how to use it, how to apply it. And one of the interesting things here is about the last bullet around e-portfolios and partnerships. We are a strong advocate of electronic portfolios, and we're a strong advocate of it because, one, the evidence is emerging that it actually deepens student learning. Students who engage in a portfolio reflect on their own learning, and that helps them deepen it. And it provides the actual evidence of student learning that can be shared with a variety of audiences. It is not Facebook. Okay? These are just some of the examples of what we have learned, or what the employers were saying. And again, I'm not going to go through each of these things, but you can see the kinds of things that they're talking about needing. And again, it's echoing the innovation, the critical thinking, the broad skills that are challenges for them in a more complex world. Employers actually believe that higher education is doing a pretty good job of preparing students. Contrary to the popular media, employers are thinking that we do a fairly good job. Could it be better? Yes, it could. And this is why they say it, because they think we're doing a really good job at entry-level position preparation. What they're not as happy about are preparing students to be able to be advancing in the industries in which they're going, or the jobs and the careers that they're pursuing. Again, it's not awful, okay? But they're saying there is a difference here. Preparing for the entry-level job, not bad. But we want people who you can hire who will advance and grow with the organization in ways that we don't even know how the organization is going to be developing over the next 5 to 10 years. And we need employees who know how to grow and develop into those new uncharted territories. What are the kinds of practices that employers like to see that show evidence of how our students have learned? Research questions, being able to deal with that. Heavy emphasis on research here at Michigan State. They like that. They want to see it. Okay? They really think it helps with the analytic, the problem solving. Internships. Major projects that show how students can take their knowledge and use it. Scientific knowledge. Again, part of that is the effort, I think, to be able to engage in analysis, to be systematic in how one moves through things, and actually knows how to use technology, science that's out there. And they're actually quite interested in ethical behavior. Think about it. Now, there are companies that have engaged with a lot of notoriety in unethical behaviors, okay? But they actually would like employees who recognize, at least, that they're engaging in unethical behaviors. Even if they feel like those employees feel like they don't have a choice in it if they want to keep their job. But they actually would like employees who can raise those ethical issues early on and perhaps even come up with solutions to be able to achieve what the industry or the company wants to achieve in an ethical manner. How are they treating customers, et cetera, et cetera. what would they like to see? Okay. Transcript. The transcript isn't all that helpful for employers. Tells you courses, tells you grades. Doesn't tell you what the student actually learned in any of those courses. Okay? They need something more than that. Would they advise? These are the employers. These are sort of C-level employers, including HR directors, et cetera. They would encourage their own children to have not just a major, but to have a major that equally includes those cross-cutting, broad, what often are referred to as soft skills. Those are equally important as the major. And that brings us to the quality agenda. And that's part of what AAC&U has been trying to push recently, is completion, yes. Retention, yes. But it also needs to include an equal emphasis on quality. It is not enough to just produce more graduates. They have to be able to be equipped with the kinds of skills and abilities that they need not just for work, but they need to live in a democratic society. They need to have full lives, enriched lives, led outside of the academy or outside of their employment. The thing is, we actually know what can help lead to quality. There is a consensus on those aims and outcomes. You saw many of them in that list of things that employers said they looked for. Those are the exact same things that faculty for 3 decades have been saying they're trying to teach students. It's important to teach students in higher education. We know about practices that foster not only retention and completion, but also deeper quality learning. We know what works with underserved students. Okay, part of that retention, part of that access, part of that completion is we have to broaden the population of students who are coming to higher education, who are entering, completing successfully higher education. They are not the students that higher education's model was created to serve. It was created to serve a much smaller, more privileged population than it is currently being asked to do. And therefore our methods and our pedagogies are having to change as well. But we know many of the things that actually work to provide a quality education for those students who come to us either least well prepared or who have been underserved in the past. And assessment is a critical part of all of that. Because what assessment does, faculty have always been engaged in assessment. It's called what we do as faculty to evaluate our students' performance. Okay, that is assessment. And what we're saying is assessment has to continue to play an important role, but it needs to do it not just in individual classrooms, but it needs to do it in a more broad-based way that is more shared, because we do share outcomes, we do share some practices, we need to be sharing our assessments of the student performance in those areas. And we have things that do that, that not only give us the data we need for reporting and accountability to external audiences, but at the same time provide us with, as faculty, with the kind of information that help us do a better job, and the same information that helps our students reflect on their own learning and be able to do a better job themselves. We're often looking for the thing beyond what we already have. And our argument is we already have a lot of stuff that's here that we know about, and we keep looking for the other thing that's going to, no, we've got it here. We just need to focus on that. We really need to have assessment practices that verify what we're doing and what our students are doing at the level of achievement that we need from our students. Another earlier survey that we did, I'm just going to run through very, very quickly. They're talking about the accountability challenge. Again, the kinds of things that they're looking for. And they're looking for you as faculty to enter your judgment into this picture. They actually care. Employers care what faculty think about the performance of students. They're disappointed in that the evidence that they have been getting in the past is a grade for a course that you taught. Okay, so that doesn't tell me what I need to know. But I do want to know what you as a faculty member have to say about this. The thing at the bottom here, they don't care about scores on a multiple choice question test because they say it's not a multiple choice world. So don't give me test scores that are multiple choice. That doesn't help me as an employer. It doesn't help our students very much in a bottom line kind of way. Wayne Johnson, Hewlett-Packard, just echoing that. So this is how AAC&U has been approaching this and been advocating. We do need standards. We need to be able to articulate the level at which we like to see our students perform. When I was an undergraduate student and as a new faculty member, the thing that I had been told was, well, don't tell students exactly what you want. The good students will figure it out. Okay? And as a student, that was the approach that most of my teachers, my faculty took. Now, I happened to be pretty good at figuring it out, okay? And so I was successful. But some of my colleagues struggled with that. Okay? Letting our students know what we expect is actually a good thing. But what we do has to come out of the faculty. It is still the case that if faculty are not owning it, it's just that passing fad, and as soon as the next president or provost comes along, the next time the next class comes along, it's not going to be of any enduring existence. Okay? And it's going to be confusing for students, because the students are going to get different things in different places. We should be focusing on what our students do well and building off of that. Whereas so much of what we have built into higher education is about what they don't do well. And again, the research, we're classic in higher education at doing incredibly good research and then ignoring the findings because it wasn't the research I did. Okay? The research is really clear. The more you tell students and you tell people, you tell colleagues what they can't do, the more likely they are to believe it. The more you can tell them what they do and how they can build from that to do more, the more likely they are to do it. And so much of what we have settled for in terms of assessing student learning is a snapshot, a one point in time, rather than looking at it over time to see the growth, the development, the ability to transfer, the ability to integrate, the ability to take an analysis, do something with it and see what the impact is, make a change and move on. That's basic scientific research. Okay? We teach the method, we don't teach how to do it, and we don't actually respond to creating that kind of evidence ourselves to learn from, even though we argue that it's a useful thing to do. That leads us to the value rubrics. How do we let students know that they're learning? How do they know? I remember papers and tests that I got back, and lots of red stuff on it, and a grade, a score. That I remember. I don't remember what I learned. I don't remember what it was about it that was so good, but I remember that I got a good score on it. Okay? How do we help the contrails here? Have a track, a record, a path that students can look at and see this is what I've been able to do and not. The value rubrics focus on student performance. Those kinds of things are examples of the kinds of things that we should be asking our students to do in every class. Not all of them in every class, but these are the kinds of things. They produce something that a student can see, that it is a tangible item that they can look at. These are the practices. If you're familiar with George Koo at Indiana University, with the NSSE, National Survey of Student Engagement, indirect measures, student reports about their own learning. Okay? But from those data, nationally, after several years of doing this, they had a large enough national sample to be able to start to see patterns of what students were reporting and how what they reported was connected then to things like grade point average, retention, graduation. These are the kinds of practices, the kinds of pedagogies that seem to be effective or seem to be linked and correlated with students talking positively about their learning and what they had gained. We've added ePortfolio at the bottom in green, which George Koo didn't because it wasn't part of their survey. But again, what we're finding is emerging evidence from campuses that students who engage in ePortfolios, compared to students in the same courses, same institution stuff not doing ePortfolios, that students doing ePortfolios had deeper gains in actual learning as demonstrated through the work that they did. So this is the NESI data. They've taken that data and they have scales that are out there. The 4 scales here are deep learning, gains in practical knowledge, gains in personal social development, and gains in general. And what you see is this is the student who has reported no engagement in any of those high impact practices during their educational career. If they report 1 or 2 instances of engaging in those high impact practices, 3 or 4, 5 or 6. Regardless of the scale that they're looking at, the more involvement in those kinds of practices, the higher the gains in the reports of learning that they are expressing themselves. Now again, it's student self-report, okay? But at least it's doing something for those students in terms of their own perceptions about their learning. Obviously, we want to check that against actual performance of some or another, okay? Average gains in each of these areas, again, from those students who talked about engaging in these particular practices, so learning communities, service learning, study abroad, internships, student faculty, research, capstones. Those are the average gains for students participating versus non-participating. So again, it's just a pattern that participating in these practices does seem to be connected to gains. But of course, it's not just doing them, one has to do them well. And that means not the student, but it means the faculty as well. You need to design them, you need to think about how to do this, and what is the point? Why? Why is the student engaging in the practice? How do we want them to engage? For what outcomes and what gains would we like to see? These are the things that seem to be connected to doing them well. There's time on task, i.e. the students can't just do it for an hour a month. Okay, it has to be something that they're committing time to. They need to be able to interact with their peers and with their faculty. A lot of feedback, diverse groups, and higher order thinking. And again, this is all out of the NESI data. Campus examples. Portland State has constructed a general education program that runs all 4 years. And it starts out with learning communities and moves through a whole set of writing requirements to a senior capstone. There are research projects, community-based learning, et cetera. So they've scaffolded it so that students have repeated opportunities that are part of the curriculum, that are part of what students are being graded for. It's part of the requirements that students have. They can't avoid it. Okay? It's an intentional part. The institution is saying this is important, and they scaffold it throughout the student's experience. University of Maryland has a program called Civicus, interdisciplinary classes, student life in the library. Again, it's a recognition that most student learning actually doesn't happen in our classes. That was a real shock to me as a faculty member. I thought if I hadn't said it and they hadn't gotten it in my class, they didn't get it. Okay? Well, quite frankly, they do most of their learning outside of our classes. Okay? Our job as faculty is to generate in them the desire to learn those things outside of our classroom. We have to give them a foundation. We have to get them set up. But we have to also give them the opportunity and the requirement, really, to be able to go out and learn. University of Nebraska-Lincoln focuses on civic engagement. And so they have, on all colleges, all majors across the campus, and it's one of, again, a large institution much like yours, civic engagement is built into, again and again and again, what they're doing. No matter what you're studying, how does it relate to civic? How does it relate to giving back? How does it relate to those connections? Texas A&M, again, has made civic engagement part of their accreditation process. They're in the SACS region, the southern region. They have a thing called QEP, Quality Enhancement Plan, a project that every campus has to do as part of their accreditation, re-accreditation, regionally. They said, this is important for us, this is something we're interested in. They've built these things into something that on most campuses is an onerous burden that everybody hates, and they've tried to turn it into something that is actually beneficial for the campus. They've done it around ethical behavior. Students actually did, on their iPhones and stuff, short videos about bad decisions they've made as students and the ethical and personal and social responsibility implications of it. They showed them at halftime, quarter break, and at basketball games, the ones that they thought were the best. Okay? They had it on a website. They had a competition for it. That was part of a QEP. Then they switched to doing civic as another one. So again, it involved the entire campus. It involved students. It involved faculty across the campus. Monterey Bay looked at civic literacy across the curriculum. They build in, again, in a more academic way, how each discipline, each area of study relates and contributes to the civic well-being, i.e. beyond me and beyond the institution to giving something back in a larger context. And Sacramento focused on faculty. They created faculty learning communities. And they talked about what they were trying to have their students do and different outcomes and different types of learning. And interdisciplinary teams of faculty. And they videotaped it. You can actually go on YouTube if you Google CSU Sacramento Faculty Learning. And you can see videos. They had a videographer who, one of the faculty in their film program, came in and videotaped them. So you can actually see the process that faculty went through, from the sciences, the arts, the social sciences, et cetera. So the value rubrics started in 2007 in response to the U.S. Department of Education, Margaret Spelling's report about higher education wasn't doing a very good job and we needed to develop basically a test, everybody thought, to have our students pass it and if they could get their college degree or something. You know. Anyway, we said we think there's a better way than having our students all take a test. And the report actually mentioned faculty, I think, once. And we said, no, it has to be grounded in the faculty. We think faculty actually know what they're doing. And can we come up with an approach? We had teams of faculty. Don't read this. You can't read this. You know, no, you can't do this. Don't even try. Don't even try. We had teams of faculty from across the country, all kinds of institutions, took each of 15 learning outcomes, critical thinking, intercultural understanding, ethics, and so on and so forth, writing, and they came up with rubrics. They looked at what had already been developed by their colleagues at different times over time. What were the things that were shared? What were the most common characteristics of learning in each of these areas? They developed a front page, that's which this is, which gives you a little bit of a definition, talks a little bit about how they came at it. You need to know what they were thinking as they went through this. And sometimes they have a glossary if there are terms that may not easily understandable. This is what the rubric actually looks like. Let me go back here. It has down the left-hand side, but these are the criteria, the things that were shared in common around quantitative literacy. Across the top are levels of performance. They started with what they thought a baccalaureate graduate should be able to demonstrate in each of those areas, down to 1, which is, label's gone there, but it says benchmark, should say benchmark, which they said is actually the students who are sitting in their classrooms. These are the faculty developing this, looking at students in their own classrooms, saying this is about where they're at. And then the milestones are simply markers along the way to tell you that you're actually moving from here to here. And in the middle thing here is a set of performance descriptors, i.e. what would the learning look like? We tried to not use jargon. We tried to keep it positive. 15 rubrics. Well over 100 faculty working on these. They drafted the rubrics. We tested them on campuses but with faculty, in their classes, with their students. They gave feedback to the teams, said, this doesn't make sense, this isn't clear, there are too many things here, not enough over here. They revised them, tested them, revised them, tested them 2 to 4 times depending upon the rubric. You can actually go to Open Ed practices here and see a collection of rubrics that were there. To date, over 4,000 institutions, 17,000 individuals have actually gone, downloaded them, used them in some way. Just recently, the voluntary system of accountability, if you're looking at that part of it, has said that the value rubrics can be used by institutions now, along with student e-portfolios, as the reporting mechanism for student learning on their campuses, rather than one of the standardized tests that they had required before. We did do a national reliability study as well, because we're interested in whether faculty in different disciplines using the same rubric would come up with vastly different judgments about the level of student performance. And what we found was there were some differences, but none of them were statistically significant. So that science faculty, humanities faculty, looking at the same student work using the same value rubric, essentially judged the level of performance the same. Okay, so this rubric seemed to work across disciplinary bounds. What are campuses finding? This is from Kansas, University of Kansas, and it's an example. They said, well, let's redesign our courses. Let's have the traditional lecture for the big class economy of scale courses, and then let's do a team design course that would bring in the librarians, that would bring in some of the student affairs folks, that would bring in faculty from different disciplines, that would involve graduate students along with faculty in designing a course around having, in this case, students do critical thinking. They're interested in developing critical thinking courses here. And this is what they essentially were finding, is that the combination of focus on critical thinking as an outcome for the courses involved in this, there were several courses in a variety of departments, adopting a new pedagogical approach that included more of the high impact practices versus the traditional lecture, and what they found in terms of improvement in their pilot study of students. Okay, again, they weren't hand selected, they were just whoever signed up for different courses. But this was one part of the critical thinking rubric. One criterion was evaluation of sources and evidence. That's one part of critical thinking, okay, one dimension of it. And the pattern they found there is that students weren't doing better with that. And so it gave them information about what they were doing in their courses that they needed to focus attention on. So we think it's really important that our students can actually know something about the quality of evidence, okay? But they're not getting it in what we're doing, okay? So we need to pay more attention to that. Whereas with issues, analysis, conclusions, they were doing quite fine with that. But it was the evidence that they were struggling with. So they could then know what to do to try to improve what students were doing. This is looking at writing, another example over the 4 years, a way of taking information useful to the faculty and improving their own pedagogy and courses, and for reporting purposes. So part of this is how to represent it to other audiences using a rubric and what you find. And so this is what they could demonstrate to their accreditor in terms of improvement in writing from first year to fourth year, using the rubric, using student work. What they found, these are their own words, that the course design actually yielded results. It pointed to the importance of the assignment. The rubric allowed them to actually focus on assignment. Well, you know, part of the reason the students didn't show me this, I didn't ask them to. They didn't know they were supposed to be doing that, okay, paying attention to it. So that the assignment became critically important. And large institution, lots of students, lots of budget pressure. It was sustainable and manageable in that setting using rubrics rather than a one-off kind of test. Mary Huber, Pat Hutchings from the, both of them used to be at the Carnegie Foundation for Teaching. Again, something I like from their book on integrative learning. A student's ability to integrate their learning across disciplines, across courses, throughout a program, with their lives outside of the academy is critically important, and it's becoming even more and more important. University of Oregon, another example. They had students doing portfolios. And again, what they found was that changes in learning and pedagogy as a result of participation in e-portfolios. Faculty had to change how they taught, what their emphasis was, what they emphasized, and they found that students' learning improved as well. E-portfolios are used on over half of college campuses these days, typically not campus-wide. They're often in a certain college or sets of programs and stuff. Using e-portfolios does improve retention, graduation, and it does deepen student learning. And one of the other things it encourages is faculty collaboration. I don't have to teach every one of these things in my class, and one-off teaching no longer works. The fact that students don't get it in freshman comp, well, of course they don't. Part of it is they're unlearning part of what they were taught before they got to us, and then they're learning how to write in a different way in higher education, but they can't do it in freshman comp alone. They have to continually revisit it as they move along. Same for critical thinking. Same with any of the things that we think are important for our students to learn. We have to collaborate. We have to be able to say, I'm working on these things as well, and taking them to higher levels, more sophisticated levels, as they move into those higher level courses that are often in the major. The thing I'm going to close with, because I think we're out of time, is what we're finding from campuses that are taking this kind of approach is that the more that faculty engage in these kinds of conversations, and that's why this project is so exciting to me, it's because you are graduate students from across colleges. You are going to be the next generation of faculty, hopefully in tenure positions. And it's you that make the difference. It isn't just about the knowledge. What we're finding is that if you engage students in the learning through these kinds of practices around why is the information important, is to be able to communicate. I'll give you one example, and then I will stop, of a campus that started a learning community. And it was an institution that had a lot of underserved students. And they took the first writing course that students were taking that was a non-credit course. It's the remedial developmental course. So they couldn't get into the credit writing course. They took the first writing course that was for credit, and they took I think it was a sophomore level disciplinary course, I think it was in political science. And they created a learning community. And they asked the students in that developmental class to write a short essay about something that they were passionately interested in. And they gave it to the students in the credit writing course. Now one would think, well, what they're supposed to do is correct the grammar and the spelling and those kinds of things, which is a typical kind of assignment for students to do. No. They said, write back to those students in the developmental class what you hear them saying. Say back to them what it is that they're passionate about, what they're interested in. Write it up and send it back to them. They did it to the disciplinary course too, and they said, you look at that developmental writing, write it back to them in terms of what a political scientist would understand what they're talking about in terms of that discipline. The developmental students got those things back. They did it through a wiki that was shared electronically. They had to rewrite what it was that they were trying to say, whether it was matched with what was being said back to them and not. The writing course for credit students then had to take the new essay, the revised essay, and go out on the web and find some type of graphical, pictorial representation of what it was that the student was talking about. The disciplinary students had to do it within their disciplinary context. Again, a graphical, pictorial, representational, not a text, but a non-text representation of what it was the student was talking about. And they gave those back to the student. What they found was that the students in the developmental course had a couple standard deviation improvement in success. And what they realized is that it wasn't about writing, it was about communication. And they wanted to be able to communicate. And what they did is that they spent a whole lot of their own time now doing the mechanics of writing better, because they understood that that was what was keeping them from being able to communicate. And that one needed to communicate not just in text, but in other forms as well in order to get one's message across, because we don't all learn best out of text. Okay? And so all of those students learned much more and much deeper as a result of it. One example of how to take the high impact practices, the collaboration. Every faculty member was still grading his or her own class with their own assignments, but the assignments had changed. And what they found is that the student learning had changed too. You are going to be confronting more and more of those kinds of students. And there are things that you can do that will change that and change their ability to be successful and your ability to be successful with them. And at the same time, better prepare them for that world that they're going to encounter and be more successful. And it is not at the loss of content. That's the other thing we're finding. Students will actually go out and gain more content. That's part of the flipped course and that kind of thing. Faculty play this role. Faculty are the ones who can help do that. I'm sorry, MOOCs don't do it. The push now is to get very economical, and the way to do that is to get faculty out of the picture. Most of the students taking Coursera, which gets a lot of press, 95% of those students taking that course already have college degrees. It's not the student who really needs it. I can go out and get that stuff. I know what to do with it. I know that wonderful content, that wonderful lecture, and I know what to do with it. The student who's not been to college isn't going to know what to do with it. It's going to be interesting. They will learn something, I'm sure. But most of them aren't finishing it either. And pretty soon they're not going to be open. It's going to cost money to do something with it. So, all right, that's my end of my preaching to you. Thank you very much.